Metal embellishments are beautiful for so many different types of projects. And today on Stamp TV, I'm going to show you how to make your own metal embellishment using some ultra-thick embossing powder and a deeply etched red rubber stamp from the new Spring Parade Stamp TV kit. Let me show you the tools and products you need for this technique. First, you're going to need some cardstock, and I'm using a piece of the tomato soup cardstock. And the cardstock that you choose is going to depend on what color embossing powder you want to use. So because I'm going to make mine look like a copper image, I've chosen tomato soup because that's a close color. I'm using some of the ultra thick embossing powder. This is the embossing enamel. You may have heard this referred to as UTEE. This is a great product. These are huge granules of embossing powder, and they really create a big loft on your card when they heat up. So you'll see that in just a minute. Although we don't carry this particular product in our online store, if you visit stamptv.com, you can click on our Amazon store and then click on embossing, and we have all the different colors in our Amazon store. You also will need some Versamark or other type of embossing ink, and I like the Versamark for this project. I'm also going to add a little bit of this rub-on paste, and this is also available at all of the big box stores. We don't carry this anymore because it's so readily available in the big box hobby and craft stores. But if you don't have anything like this, you can also use a little Stays-On ink, some kind of ink that will adhere to non-porous items will work just fine. So a little brown or black ink will work as well. In fact, if you do have that kind of ink, it'll dry a little bit better. This kind of stays a little bit, it doesn't really dry all the way. It feels a little bit greasy, but then you can wipe it off with a paper towel, and it kind of just sets into the crevices, and you'll see that as well. You're also going to need a heat tool, and I am using my Marvy embossing heat tool. And the other thing you're going to need is an old baking sheet. And I have an old cookie pan here that I'm going to use for this. The reason why you want to do this is because you don't want to touch this embossing powder anywhere when it's hot. And it's not only just hot embossing powder, but it moves around because it's so thick. It's kind of like lava. So you really don't want to take the chance of embossing it and then tipping it and having it get onto your skin. So by embossing it on something like a baking sheet that can certainly take the heat, then you don't have to worry about hurting yourself in any way, burning yourself. So I'm going to open up this embossing powder, and you can see how thick these granules are compared to our super fine detail embossing powder that I usually use. This is nice and thick. What I'm going to do is start by inking up the entire piece here of cardstock. Now I've cut this cardstock bigger than I need it because once I'm all done creating the embellishment, then I'm actually going to trim off the edges and make it a focal image for my card. Now you can also trim around the image and make it a little metal embellishment too. You just need a nice sharp pair of scissors, and I would try to use a little bit less of a detailed stamp if you're going to do something like that, because it is a little bit difficult to get all around the perimeter of a very detailed image. So next I'm going to use this embossing powder and get that all over the surface of my piece of cardstock. And you can see I'm doing that off to the side here because I don't want that to be in my heating area. So I want to kind of brush that off to the side and just work over here. So now that I've got the embossing powder on there, I'm going to heat it up using my Marvy heat tool. And you'll see a lot of it will just blow right off because it takes several layers to really get this nice and thick. But you can see it starting to come up. And you see that kind of blowing off there? It actually is a little more helpful if you kind of work straight down on it, but it doesn't take long for that ink to dry just enough where it's not going to hold on to the embossing powder anymore. But that's okay, we're going to keep adding more. You can see it's got lots of little ridges in it and dimples. You will see those little dimples and ripples in it the first couple of layers, and then all of that will go away. So now while that's really hot, I'm going to add more on top. Oops. There we go. Add more on top. And then I'm going to shake off the excess. Well, I better get a little bit more on there. There we go. I'm going to get some into the center and heat that up a little bit. It's going to blow some of it off, well, most of it off. But you can see the little bit that's stuck on there, now it's not looking quite as ripply. Now, the other thing that you can do is give it a second to dry. And then you can add some more Versamark to it. So that'll just take a second for it to cool. And we can add more ink on top. Okay. We just really want to get this nice and thick. And it does take quite a few tries to really get that to stick. Okay, now I'm just going to lay this on top of this embossing powder that I already have over here. And now, heat it some more. The reason why you need to put all of these extra layers on is because unless it's nice and thick and really flowing on top of your cardstock, you don't get quite as deep of an impression, and you lose a little bit of the detail. And that's what we want. We want the detail from this beautiful dragonfly stamp that I'm going to use. And while that's drying, I will show that to you. The stamp I'm going to use is from the Spring Parade Stamp TV kit. This is from the Dreams Take Flight stamp set. It's almost cool. I think one more layer, one or two more layers will do it. Really get that nice and inky. And then I'll sprinkle some more on. Yeah, this should do it. Okay, and melt that. You know, I'm watching this embossing powder and I'm seeing that it looks thick and I'm seeing a little bit of flow, but I'm not seeing quite as much as I want for a deep enough impression. So I'm actually going to go with one more layer. When you're looking at purchasing the UT embossing powder, you're going to find some beautiful colors too. They have not just the copper, which the copper is really fun to play with, but they also have gold and silver. And one thing that's fun to do is while you're doing this type of thing is to mix the different metals together. A little bit of gold, a little bit of silver, a little bit of copper, and kind of create some swirling. That's also another really fun look if you've got more than just one. You can see that is not quite cool yet. It does help if I lift it off the metal sheet and just wave it a little bit. So we're going to go with one more layer and then we're going to stamp. And right before we stamp, I'm going to have them zoom in nice and tight so that you can really see the detail when I pull that stamp out. Okay, so one more round of Versamark. And sometimes you can you can catch the embossing powder when it's really, really hot and really, really melted, and you won't have to use Versamark ink every time. You can just pour more powder on top, but the air temperature in here is a little bit chilly, and I think it's cooling just enough where that's not working for me here. All right, and now the final layer. Move that over just a little. And although this embossing powder does scrape off of the pan, you may want to dedicate a pan just to this type of work that you do in your stamp room, so you don't have to worry about it too much getting messy. It's kind of fun to get messy. Okay, now you can see it's getting nice and smooth and really hot. Alright, now I'm going to get the stamp in my hand, but I want you to see, you can actually see the embossing powder move when it gets hot enough. It'll start to look liquidy. See that? Can you see that moving? And that's what you want. You want it to be that hot that it looks like it's flowing lava. And make sure the whole thing is hot so that you get a good impression on all the parts of your image. And you want to work quickly, so now that I've got this nice and hot, I'm going to stamp it right away and just press right in there. And leave it there for a second. Now, I would highly recommend you not doing this with clear stamps. Although clear stamps are beautiful to work with and really fun for accurate placement, rubber stamps can take the heat. It's very difficult to kill a rubber stamp, so I would only do this with rubber stamps if you're going to do it. Okay, now I'm going to pull that out. And I'm going to zoom in even more here, and you can see all of that beautiful detail. See all the little dots and everything that were on that stamp, and you can see the stamp is still perfect. There's nothing wrong with the stamp at all. There isn't even any residue in it. And there is a really neat impression. Now, if you don't like the way that turned out, you can reheat it, and it'll turn right back to liquid, and you can try it again. So there's no risk that if you didn't get it centered or you didn't make it perfect, just go ahead, heat it up again, and start all over. Now, you can take a little bit of something like this embossing paste or a little bit of ink and pick a shade that's a little darker than what you're working with, and you can rub something like that over the image itself, and that will bring out some of the look, and you get a lot more detail that way. You can see that where you may not see as much of that detail on the other side. You can really see the detail here. You can work some of that around the outside too. And that just makes it look kind of burnished and just gives it an aged look. So let me show you a finished card project that I made using this copper metal, faux metal embellishment here. Here what I've done is I've added the dragonfly to a little bit of faux wood background. I used our fresh asparagus cardstock here, and I used a little bit of the dusty sage ink on top of it. I also made this panel too with the turquoise sea and the dusty sage on top, and I was going to use that. I didn't know which one I liked better, so I decided to go with this one for my finished card, but experiment with different backgrounds for your projects. And all I did was take that panel, and I did have to use some score tape to get that to lay nice and flat on my piece of black onyx. And if you look real closely, I actually bent it a little bit and created some fracture lines in it to make it look even a little bit older. And then I stamped one of the greetings from the Dreams Take Flight stamp set and just put a little panel underneath, and that made a very pretty and very different card. Not only are these faux metal images great for cards, but they make beautiful centerpieces for journals and lightweight embellishments for any scrapbook page.